The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people are evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. Still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, the group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I'm geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Hawaiian Volcano Tracker update. Today is Thursday, November 17th, 2022, and we have not a huge amount of changes on the surface, Dane, but we have a couple of things to talk about. Mauna Loa is still quaking a little bit more than the previous week, but still not quite to its peak from before, but we can talk about that a little bit. Kilauea's lava lake hasn't really risen at all in the last month, but it's still showing earthquakes and GPS signals underground, so it's still kind of filling at a deeper level down there. And that's the long and the short of it. And we can talk about all the nuances and details of that and your questions and all of that as we go along. What have you got for us today?
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing I can really think of, I mean, not much really going on in Kilauea, Mauna Loa. We'll go over it, but that we had a 3.9 earthquake last night down in Pahala, deep Pahala area. So that would be, related to that ongoing Pahala activity between 30 and 40 kilometers down, about 21 miles plus since 2019, right? So part of that ongoing series of earthquake activity, but it's right by where that magnitude 5.0 hit. About a month ago now? Maybe not quite, but yeah. About that same area. So it's a complex area in there for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and it's part of that pattern of not just earthquakes in the area, but larger ones that has been going on for a while that we heard about, highlighted in that Pahala talk that we shared a few weeks ago as well.
Right.
So yeah, those are the highlights this week. We'll step through it. We have a cool unannounced special here that we compiled from a FOIA request. Give you guys a quick peek on the screen here. We actually have a release of that drone footage that they fly when they're making those new maps, and the thermal cameras that they have as well to make the thermal maps. And so just flash this up here for you guys real quick as a little preview, and we can get into it.
I mean, I would just want to talk about that just a little bit on the backstory, because that's kind of funny to me. Somebody FOIA requested USGS the Freedom of Information Act, where they basically have to give the raw footage over for a drone flight in October, right? So that's what Philip here has stitched together, is a sequence of photos taken over the course of their flight that day.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I'll show the tweet, and we'll go through all that.
Little teaser.
Just a little bit, something extra, so you have something novel to look forward to as we go in here. All right, so that's really the start for Kilauea. You can kind of see it on the screen there. It's still hot in there. They see the active lava lake. It's hot under the crust, and the lava presumably is still coming in and circulating, but the whole thing is not uplifting. That's a summary for Kilauea, as we pointed out. And there's our Kilauea view of the day here. Dawn view, and then similar from Mauna Loa. You can see there's Mauna Loa viewed from Mauna Kea with some screen issues here. There it goes. Nice sunrise view there over Mauna Loa, which is still quiet on the surface, and I can summarize Mauna Loa by putting up this last 2-month earthquake graph here. Presuming it decides to show it. So there it is. There it is. Okay, so I've just stretched it a little bit here, so it's easier to see from a distance, but you can see here on the left, this is that high peak we had at the end of September. And since then, it's been still elevated, but not nearly as much as, so here's that peak right in there. Here's that elevated level. Still not nearly as much as that high peak that we saw back in late September, early October. All right, so should I jump into a day in here?
Yeah, I think so.
So that's the Mauna Loa earthquakes there, and that's kind of our summary. So we'll switch it over to Mauna Loa here. Let's get the Mauna Loa report tag up in here, and just to start off with, here's a USGS update from today. Still not erupting, no signs of imminent eruption, no significant changes in the past 24 hours, still in a state of heightened unrest as indicated by increased earthquake activity and inflation at the summit. The current unrest is still most likely being driven by renewed input of magma 2 to 5 miles beneath Mauna Loa summit. So that's still in that deep heart of the mountain, that central area where it's been collecting, but not shallow enough to cause all the extra earthquakes or to cause the ground tilt signals to start fluctuating, which we've seen a little bit of that, but it hasn't been doing that for over a month now. So the most recent 24-hour earthquake count was 32. That's a little bit on the low side. I'll show you guys here shortly. We actually had one that got up into the 60s. But otherwise, just to show, tilt meters are still showing no significant information, and everything else is unchanged here in the report. Just to note here, this is where we're getting this background. Background was 10 to 20 per day earthquakes, and elevated heightened unrest is 40 to 50 per day. And that's where all that is sourced there. So we're just trying to expand and clarify what these reports mean. And I thought I'd start off with this plot that we showed that was an excerpt from the meeting last month. And there you see that pattern of earthquakes that had gone up to that peak and then had a second peak here, and basically had come down. By this point, about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, it looked like it might be still on a decline, but for comparison, I'll put up this one now. Once again, you can see that low peak was in here, and really it's kind of coming up in little pulses, but generally you can see it's been reaching higher levels. Here's the one that reached between 60 and 70 earthquakes on the 12th of November here. So it's still elevated. It's still trending up slightly. It still hasn't reached the higher levels that we might be extra concerned that something might come to the surface. So we know magma is still going in, and that's the bottom line. And it's all about whether it can continue to adjust without erupting, or whether that magma can find a space to just push the mountain out, as it's been doing for the last 20 years or so. So let's move on from that and show you guys the normal graph. This is what the normal graph looks like. And I like to rescale it because otherwise you have to look at this side over here, earthquakes per day. We're 0 to 80 in this graph, and some of our other graphs were 0 to 120 or 200, so that makes it harder to compare from one week to the other if you're just looking every week, right? It looks like kind of normal, but really this is that higher value right there that we got for the 12th. And back down today, you can see up and down, and that's expected as it keeps filling. And once again, what we're really looking for a sign of it doing something additional, going to an extra gear, is it having sustained high levels. And so it's not quite sustained yet, right? The sustained level is probably down in here. It's sustaining maybe that many 30 earthquakes per day, more or less, but it's not really sustaining 50 or 60. It's reaching those levels, but not sustaining them. So zoomed out to the last year, now we have earthquakes per week here on the side. So our last week was 300 earthquakes if you count from today. If you go back from this, I believe it's Sunday to Sunday on here, you see we had that initial peak, came back down a little bit, and here we are in that next little one right here. And this last bar you have to ignore because it's not a full period yet. And for the last 5 years, you really don't see that little nuance, a little drop. It still looks like it's fairly high, and it's going to be overall a more numerous event of earthquakes than we had back in early 2021 back in here. Over the last week, here they are, the maps of the earthquakes at Mauna Loa Summit. It's that same pattern we've been seeing. We believe that dike, that long blade that fills, is more or less something like that within a mountain. So it's filling and it's pushing up on the surface above that, but it also pushes to the sides that way and that way. And this is where that area seems to pressurize and quake quite a bit, and this side less so because this whole flank is able to move towards Kilauea, and that's a whole other dynamic in that direction. And interesting, we have so these are colored by depth in this particular case. So we have one that's between 40 and 70 kilometers. This purple one right in here. Zoom it in so you can see it better. There's a purple one right in there, among all the reds that are shallowest and the oranges that are intermediates. So we'll look at that one a little later because it's unique. But otherwise, the last month there's a pattern, very similar pattern, just a little bit more filled out, populated with vents. And looking at the tilt now, here's the last week. We're just seeing those daily variations. That's normal background. You see a couple of these spikes from the earthquakes occurring here. Looks like this is possibly some kind of longer period or something. You know, there's something going on in here. From earthquake activity that's not necessarily right there, but further away. And we're looking at the last month. This is the kind of signal we were looking for in a tilt, where it actually was moving up. So that was the last time we had some shallow, potentially shallow injection of magma into the shallow depths of the mountain within an upper 2 miles of the surface, right? So if you're looking at the mountain from sea level, that upper sea level to the top kind of part more or less, that's the shallow part. So otherwise pretty steady. You see this, you know, you could try to draw some wiggles in here, but really it's not changing a whole lot in comparison to that scale of change we saw before. So really nothing happening here in the shallow. All right, looking at the MOKP to MLSP clean local length here. That's that north to south distance across Mauna Loa. Some people say it's more east to west, but it's across the caldera there, but look at the map later. You see it's still spreading, so this is showing a deeper signal. The volcano is still pushing, that blade is still wedging the mountain so that the two sides of the crater and the surface are getting further apart. And if you look at the up component here, it's also being pushed upwards, right? That's your telltale combination of the magma coming in, pushing sideways and up at the same time. That's a pattern we're going to look for as we look for signals on Kilauea too, but that's what you are looking for there. Zooming out for the last 5 years, just to put it in perspective, here we are still spreading, but we've had these spreads before. We've been spreading actually at this similar rate since mid to late 2018, and other times even faster with adjustments up and down of that innermost part of the caldera. And you recall, if you've been watching us, that there's a larger structure outside of that also wiggles, so that can cause these kind of minor changes to occur locally within that summit region there. And there for the last 5 years also the up. So that's the GPS signals. If we look at further down on the southwest rift, we see the tilt's actually been going down over there. the 2-year GPS signal. This is components that are east, north, and up. And what I'm really interested in mostly is what's rising. And so we see at 12,570 feet elevation, we're still rising, still going upwards there. Really, because these are 2-year plots, we're really just looking at this last little bit right in here if we can. So no discernible obvious change there. If we look down at 12,000 feet, it's a little less convincing. It looks like in the most recent period, it's been somewhat steady there. So it really seems like it's, and that's steady after earlier having been rising, right? So further down the mountain, you don't really see any of that kind of pattern, right? This jog upwards and then flattening out that you see over here. You don't really see that anywhere else. So it's still localized to the summit, and there's no sign of anything happening in any of the rifts. Let's show that, and let's keep it moving here. So here is our earthquakes for the last week. Let me zoom it in a little. There it is. And I have it sorted here by the largest magnitude. So the largest one we've had was this 3.9 that occurred last night, just before 7 p.m. local time. And it was 31.8 kilometers down. That's like 20 miles or so. That's that deep cluster that Dane was talking about down in there. And so that's the deep Pahala zone, which is similar to that shallower flank zone, but not related at all. It's just in a similar location. If we go back for the other large earthquakes this past week, there's a 3.7 that occurred offshore as part of that deep Pahala zone right in there. Go to one more, 3.6 over here on this eastern cluster of deep Pahala as well, all those below 30 kilometers down. Moving on, 3.5 down here as well. And then 3.2. 3.2 is actually over here on this northwest flank of Mauna Loa, 5 kilometers down. That's within that flank. So it's not a huge event, but it's showing that that flank is also feeling that pressure and moving a little bit. 3.0 at essentially sea level. That's right above that blade of magma over here within the mountain. So the next largest one, and we'll go to the next 3.0, and that's over here on the east flank, 7 kilometers down, right? So that's another way to see that indication of that blade coming in and actually pushing. And it's actually causing magnitude 3s on both flanks and above it, all within the same week here. So it certainly is action filling with magma in there. So beyond that, we get lots of 2s every week. But there are some up on the Caldera region as well. There's one deep one here. This is a 44 kilometer deep Kilauea, 2.8 down in here, and then we go back to these other normal 2s that we have regularly in our Pahala cluster here. So cut it off there, but that's a little bit of an overview. We'll come and look at the Kilauea ones in a little bit later as well. You still get these background ones occurring, Waimea and north, but these are all just essentially random and not related to any volcanoes, and they can happen and they can cause some local issues. But overall, it's not a primary hazard for anything to do with the volcanoes. It's more the background settling of the whole island that can happen. You can get those even on Oahu, on Maui, right? Get settling earthquakes in Michigan because of the glaciers. They used to settle there and push the ground down. I've all melted and the ground is bouncing back up, so you can get earthquakes there in the Midwest. So you always get settling earthquakes from movement one way or the other, and it's more in that category than related to volcanoes when you see them up in this further areas out here. All right, so that's our earthquake review from the map, and let's pull up the cross section once again. And apologies for the slowness of my computer today. It'll figure it out here, hopefully soon. So this is going to be the cross section that we've drawn through Mauna Loa. Force it here. Force it. There we go. Here's a cross section through Mauna Loa with our deep Pahala cluster over here. That's where those big earthquakes have just happened. The flank events that we saw just over a month ago now, I want to say it was the 13th and 14th-ish of October, were over here. That orange 13 and 15, and then our summit and northwest cluster right in here, right, with the summit ones being more this upper cloud, and northwest ones being the ones that are in this cross section left of this feeder dike, feeder input into the volcano here. So on this same background, let's see if I can get this to overlay. I'll probably have to rescale it. Yeah, this is code today. Let's see if I can figure out how to zoom in. There it is. Okay, so all right, so I'll flash it there. The same regions. So there's our deep Pahala events that have been occurring recently, including at 3.9. Here is our deep under Mauna Loa event that was down 28 miles down, deep under the summit. And then under that summit, there is that shallower under the summit, and there's a northwest of the summit. Then you have one occurring here on the flank, on the east flank, right? I'll put it back. One flank event, you still have that northwest cluster, you still have the summit cluster, and you still have the deep cluster. And that deep underneath the summit of Mauna Loa, that one falls somewhere in here, near this root of the hotspot right in there. That's where this event here is actually deeper than the Pahala zone. So if I flash it back up over here, here I try. There, we're talking somewhere down in here actually. So interesting to see that, right? Think about where the magma is coming from and the pathways and how it can have multiple pathways. And we don't really know any of this. This is all just a schematic of where these root strands might be and how many there might be. We really don't know any of that. It's just our idealized cross section here. All right, so all quiet on Mauna Loa is the bottom line still. It's still shaking underground. We're still waiting to see if it's going to do anything beyond that. It's not guaranteed that it will. It could keep quaking for a while, and then it could escalate its earthquakes, or it could wind them down. So we're still waiting to see which way it's going to go, and it's basically still holding steady. And that's one of the things about how these volcanoes behave. Sometimes they move really fast in human time, and sometimes that geologic process just seems to drag on and on and on. We're in one of those phases where that process is just a slow process geologically, and at some point it reaches a critical threshold, and then it starts going more rapidly, and that's where we might take further action, right? But we haven't got to anything like that yet. We're waiting to see if it's going to do that or if it's not. And in the last, many decades, it's not done it. So we'll wait and see. That is our Mauna Loa section, Dane. If we want to take a pause here and say some mahalos.
All right. Yeah. Thank everybody for tuning in today. We rely on viewers like you to get this information out there. Really subscribing and sharing helps immensely with the algorithm and all that, being able to get this message out there. We, like, share, subscribe. It really does help. We also like to thank our sponsor for helping us keep an eye on Mauna Loa, as always, I Care Hawaii. And we really appreciate them as a sponsor because they do so much for rural communities in Puna and Ka'u. And they really are some of the best eye care providers and specialists on the island. So we definitely recommend them, and we appreciate their support and helping us keep an eye, on Mauna Loa, dedicated to it. So really appreciate them. If you guys want to get some new glasses, they have same day glasses where they do the appointment and get you fitted, get everything, the lenses, all in a day. So definitely check out Eye Care Hawaii. And we also like to thank the County of Hawaii for the Bye Grant and the Grant and Aid program, which helps keep this program going. So we really appreciate all the support we've gotten, and definitely check out Eye Care Hawaii again. So, all right, we don't really have that many questions right now. There was one we had asked to us about the some seismometers on the top of Mauna Loa, and let me pull that up real quick. So Jennifer asked, "There's something strange on the seismos on the southwest zone of Mauna Loa at 21:55 this evening, about an hour after she posted this, or an hour before she posted this. It looks like a series of quakes that last for 5 minutes, but it's not registering as a quake. It shows up most strongly on the RCOD and the DAND meters, but it's also showing up on other meters. Do you know what this is?"
No, I don't.
Right.
But here, let's see what we can do with this. When we have a question like this, we can go through a progression of what we do. So here we have a collection of Mauna Loa's seismographs, and I have them plotted for the last 48 hours, so we can hopefully catch this signal that was a bit ago. So let's scroll down to her station. So I mean, the first thing to note is we have this kind of background, all these little splotches of ink are earthquakes occurring, and the ones that have more ink are larger earthquakes, basically. And these are all different stations, right? These are more or less the summit stations, and off to a little close to the summit on either flank up here. And then here's our southwest rift. So if I come into the RCOD and we look yesterday evening, then it appears to be this signal right here is what she's talking about right there. And you see how it looks a little bit different than some of these other ones. Like there's a regular big earthquake that then kind of tails off. So you see like,
that one's kind of weird.
Jab, 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 jab. So it could be essentially lots of small earthquakes, and if that's the case, you'd expect it to transmit through the ground and go everywhere. And as she mentions, there is a signal that occurs over here. Which station is this? The Dandelion station, DAND. That's kind of similar, right? But if you look at this, it looks like this is occurring at, let's see, something like between 9 and 10:15 p.m. Yeah, so a similar time on this one. Looks like they're a little bit offset. But you see that we have a longer signal here. And so it's going on for longer, closer to this RCOD station than it is over here. So it overlaps a little bit. But whatever it is, it's localized. It's closer to here to start. And then it moves and it actually is affecting both stations. And it's not affecting down at Kahuku, and it's not affecting further down anywhere else on a volcano. If we look further up on a volcano, I see it a little bit. See a signal a little bit right in there that looks like it corresponds, and these. So it was felt by more mildly by other stations in the saddle, not so much at the summit itself. So given that, I would suspect it's got to be some localized weather. You know, I'm not sure. I try to look at the weather and see if there was any thunder or something like that. I couldn't spot anything obvious there. So, but you know, if it wasn't that, you might have had a helicopter flying around. You know, it's flying over the station back and forth, and it's causing that chop 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 chop. And you know, maybe it's turning this way or that way, and it's actually causing more effect on the ground, or could have been military activity that in the saddle that caused localized ground shaking as well. And so I still don't know exactly what it was, right. But what I can see is that it's not happening strongly everywhere in a volcano. It's localized to one area, and it seems to be a little bit offset in time as well, especially if you look at the length of the signal, how long it lasts here at this station, right? It's something more localized to this area. So don't know what it is, but it's probably not something within a mountain underground. It's the best answer.
Yeah, just a little bit to add to that. So these seismographs, right, they're basically the raw data that these instruments are recording. So when you look at the earthquake plot that's provided by USGS, they're doing a bunch of automatic detection to try and weed out basically different signals of noise, be it traffic, be it airplanes, be it whatever, the military, at Puakaloa, they account for all of it automatically. So they're trying to give you the adjusted for earthquakes in that plot. Whereas if you look at the raw, then you got to do all that kind of work yourself. And there's signals like this one where it won't show up on the plot. But if you're looking on the raw, yeah, you'll see it. And then you got to figure out, you got to basically be a seismograph or a seismologist to be able to interpret at that point.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a great point. There definitely is a threshold on most of those maps. Those maps usually have a magnitude threshold, and when you have a very small earthquake, like these over here are legitimate earthquakes, but like something like that might be too small to even show up on a map. Right? You really need something that might be maybe like that, or definitely one of these where you see it actually get clipped and it becomes square at one end there. That's definitely the one that's showing up on a map, and these little ones may get filtered out automatically. And we sometimes see questions. I think I saw a question or a comment posted in our video last week, or a couple weeks ago, talking about the same, the USGS is always moving the earthquakes around and it shouldn't change locations and all that. But this gives you an idea of where that's coming from. Like, for example, if you're looking at two earthquakes that are occurring on top of each other, which is hard for me to zoom in and show you guys here. But if the computer is coming through and seeing a big splotch and saying, okay, that's all one earthquake. If you have two back-to-back stacked on each other, the actual raw data is really convoluted, right? So the computer has a hard time untangling it, and it can do that, but it takes more time, and it's not as automatic for that to happen. So
and
the raw data never changes. It's more about when a computer is going to pick out, like, when does the second one start? Does it start halfway through this one right here, or does it start over here? And like that kind of adjustment could cause a location to change, a magnitude to change, and all that. And so what the OSHA is actually doing is they're looking at the raw data and they're just correcting where the actual picks are, and then that, as a fallout of that, is where the location and magnitude actually changes. So that's a normal process, and there's nothing suspicious or conspiracy going on there.
And it even gets a little bit deeper in that, because once you have that plot the USGS provides where they're giving you the earthquakes, if you were to try and use that and deduce anything from it, you'd be using an unrefined data set. It takes more refinement than even that to really make it usable. When you made the graphic about Pahala, we had a few earthquakes that they were shown in the plot that were slightly elevated, and one of the seismologists jumped in and said, hey, those would probably just be relocated down to the volcanic pile back, down to the areas depths that we're more accustomed to. So it's interesting, right? It's not just like, oh, they're moving it. Yeah, they're going to move it a bunch, and eventually you'll get it to a point where the movements are very small if you're going to try and move it.
Right. But they're not actually looking at a map and saying, oh, let's move it north or south. Right. They're actually looking at this raw data and saying, let's move the timestamp of where it starts here, left or right. That's what they're actually doing. That's all they're doing. Looking at the threshold of the timestamps and like how much its amplitude is at different points in time corresponding to that timestamp. That's all they're really doing, is changing that pick, as they call it, right? Picking earthquakes. They're not really going, oh, it should be further deeper, it should be further this way or that. Like, they actually will look at the signal. Right. Yeah, so interesting.
All right.
Discussion there.
Shimmer asks, how much do you know about the internal geography of the volcanoes?
Well, we know the more they do stuff, the more clues they give to how they're configured internally. We haven't looked in there with our eyes. Obviously, there's nothing visual you can get, but you can see where earthquakes occur, for example. And what we're talking about earthquakes is, if you go back through and process the data to refine it even further, you can actually then get it very precise and look at the actual structures in 3D and see that there are blades going upwards and blades that are going to go sideways as well. So dikes and sills, right? Excuse me. Kilauea more so, because it's had a lot more of this flexing and stretching and sagging and stretching and sagging. So you see the pattern repeat itself much more often, right? So that's more clear, and that's how we know about what's there. But if the volcano has some underground structure that hasn't activated in recent time, and it hasn't caused those changes that we can measure and see the surface, then we don't have that part of it mapped, right? So we only have mapped what's been active since our instruments have been up there. Is the kind of the answer. So we kind of know, but we also kind of don't know, and that's why there's a lot of questions of what could be and how it could go and that kind of thing.
Right. Catherine asks, where are you located as you report on Mauna Loa in relation to the summit?
So we are southeast of the summit, actually closer to the summit of Kilauea, but all of Kilauea is on Mauna Loa, so we're essentially in that radius as well. But yeah, we are in range to see it if it does something, to feel it if it starts shaking a lot, but far enough away that if something were to happen, we don't have to go running in the opposite direction that quick.
Right. The other thing to add about that is there's not really anywhere great you can get close to the summit of Mauna Loa without, a significant trek. It's due to its giant size. The summit is pretty well isolated, 13,000 feet. One road will take you up to the Mauna Loa Observatory, but then you still got to hoof it the rest of the way at altitude. It's not like you're gonna, if Mauna Loa does go, we're probably going to be reporting in the same fashion we are now, because what is it to gain from going to it? You're not going to be able to get up there, and just trying to think of best ways to get a camera on it's not an easy challenge unless you're going to just settle for glow from Kona type of thing. So yeah, Mauna Loa is not like Kilauea where it's got camera easy access, right? You can drive right up to it and just stop by on your way through Highway 11 between Kau and Volcano Village. It's not like that.
Yeah, a good point.
All right, let's see if any more questions. I am not seeing anyone. All right, so we will do one more segment of Q&A later at the end of the program. So if you got any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we'll try and address them in that second segment. All right, I'll let you take over, Phil.
Thanks, Dan. We'll start our second segment here with our community corner and just mention what we have coming up in the calendar in the next week or so. This coming Saturday, a couple days from now, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at Waimea, is the North Hawaii Resilience Fair, hosted by Vibrant Hawaii. And once again, this is disaster preparedness outreach event. We're going to be there representing Hawaii Tracker. There will also be the Hamakokohala Health Center, Hamakua Youth Center, the Kailapa Community Association, the Kohala Resilience Hub, the Waikoloa Resilience Hub, and the Waimea Resilience Hub. So live music, food trucks. If you go and get your little passport stamped at each of the stations, you can get a free 5-gallon emergency supply bucket that has a first aid kit, solar-powered radio, cooler bag, and more. So come check us out there. We'll talk story in Waimea this Saturday. Anything to add here, Dane, before I move on? I guess I still have a map to show, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, this is I don't know if you said it, but the second iteration of the Makahiki Festival. First one was in Puna, Nanavali Community Association, and the hubs all in Puna came and showed up for that one. So it's going to be good to go in Waimea and get all the hubs together and do part 2.
Yeah, and then I believe next week is off because of Thanksgiving next weekend, and then the following weekend I believe we'll be in Kau and Nalehu for that outreach event, and so keep rolling from there. So 10 to 1 p.m. Show you guys the map here. Well, it's a little too zoomed in maybe, but there is a ball field. There's a community center with a resource fair inside, and a lot of these pop-up tents on the outside, including Vibrant Hawaii, the Resilience Hubs, and ourselves, as well as a stage for music, the keiki games, all that's happening. And then inside the main room, you have other activities and tables as well. And as far as the schedule, you probably can't see this. I'll scroll it down, but try to scroll it down here. Aloha and welcoming is at 10 o'clock. Opening, Mo'olelo, introductions and awards. First musical performance, 11:15. And then wrapping up at 1 p.m. there. Quick run through. And one other event to mention, well, actually two other events to mention here as part of the National Park November activity calendar. Let this catch up here. We had Veterans Day this past weekend. We have tomorrow a walk into the past with Dr. Thomas A. Jagger with our friend of the podcast, Dick Hirschberger. November 18th, 10 a.m. and noon, about an hour at the Visitor Center is the last performance this month. And otherwise, there is an event at Kahuku, Birds Not Mosquitoes, this Saturday as well, 9:30 to 11. And we have coming up on Tuesday, After Dark in the Park, from Hawaiian Volcanoes National Park, on rapid ohia death, ROD, the disease that has been affecting ohia trees for over a decade now. So that'll be interesting. And that is it for this coming up week of special events. We'll jump back into the calendar later on as we progress too. So let's move into our gas. And let me get this with the right label. We're going to talk about a volcanic hazard summary, which main hazard of the eruption is still gas. That's the biggest hazard here. As you can see, there's still fog impact blowing across the island. That's what that darker color means. The source is Kilauea right here, and it's putting out lower amounts of gas recently. So I'll say that. We'll come back to that point later. But it's still enough to be impacting nearby and downwind communities. So downwind is usually in this direction, Pahala, but now that we're getting into the winter months, we often have the flip Kona winds, and then that fog will blow up here to North Hilo, blow into the saddle, and Volcano Village, which is the nearest near a subdivision right here, will get it worse during those times as well. And so it clears out a little bit more in Kona when it happens. But it's going both ways. Just depends now. It's a little bit more here, a little bit more there. Lower levels of gas, as I mentioned before, but still blowing around. So let's explore this a little bit. Let's attempt to load purpleair.com here. This is our community citizen science monitors. People buy these monitors and put them on their houses and sign up on a website, and the data is there for all to see, benefit from. So we'll come down here and click on Pahala. And there's a history for the last couple of days. You can see there's a yellow range, and VOG, when a wind blows across Pahala, it's seen a couple spikes here, and the highest one not quite into the yellow, but high greens. That was earlier overnight last night. Right, and similarly, if I go over here to Naalehu, see similar time spike, and if I add ocean view to the plot, it does actually get into the yellow during that same time. It seems to be more on the path of the plume for ocean view there. Or is that a Kahuku cross fence maybe, yeah, which is right next to ocean. All right, so we look at Volcano. Let's add that station, and let's add this station. All right, so there they are, and they actually this morning got into the yellow as the wind shifted. And maybe for comparison, let me put that ocean view one back on here. So there's an ocean view peak, and there's a volcano peak. So you can see the wind was blowing over this way, then it switched around, and then the wind was blowing this way. And so you see different times of the day can affect different communities, both in the same day here, and have everyone have a thread of yellow gas levels at different points in the day. So just a little quick dive in there. Obviously, it can go anywhere. We can go around the whole island doing that, but that's enough, I think, to illustrate the point. Within a national park, seems to have been close enough that everything stayed in the green all day. Right? It's interesting to note that closer volcano station didn't quite get into the yellow, but that farther one did. Everything here in the park is in the green currently. The wind is only 4 miles an hour. So that explains why it's drawn as a circle and not strong enough to really disperse. Let's come up here to the charts and see the history for the day. Everything's green. Particulate matter and SO2. This is the closest station here to the park, Volcano Arts Center. And then within the park itself there, everything's in the green. So it's interesting to note that the VOG seems to be, when it's flying this direction, it seems to go kind of up and then comes back down to the ground. So there's a little pocket in there that's not getting those bad VOG signals, and you get a little slightly further away, and then you get VOG blowing closer to the ground over towards the saddle that way. So little nuances on the gas, but that's the hazard of the gas. It's still out there, still doing its thing. Unfortunately, not as bad with the lower emissions. That means that lava viewing has been pretty good still. Of course, with a transition of the winds, you can have fog blowing through these areas a little bit too. Just to note, of the three overlooks, still Devastation Trail to Kīlauea Crater and Kupina'ipali are the two best overlooks, whereas Uikahuna has actually been closed due to Nene, last we heard, and you can get close to there, but maybe not quite all the way. There's our announcement of closure from the National Park due to the Nene with the goslings out there in that area. Temporarily closed until they leave. And usually it takes them a while. Right? You're not going to force them to leave the area. They'll wait till they naturally leave with the seasons. All right, so from that viewing area at Kinakakoi, here's a capture from the B1 camera. Just a still I pulled out to share what it might look like if you're looking from far away, that wide angle view. And of course, you want to be able to zoom in if you can with a camera, binoculars, or anything like that, wherever possible, to get close in on the actual lava itself. But just to recap what the last week has been like, here it is. You can see it's steadily glowing at night. You see glow in the foreground too from some of those closer pits. Let's zoom it in a bit. If I spawn here. And otherwise you see it there in the back at the vent and that other pit as well. So it's been steady. Nothing super spectacular out of the ordinary besides the actual lava in the pit itself, which is always spectacular in my opinion. So that's the viewing this past week. And now we'll move on to our visual observations. Our practice of kilo here in Kilauea. And here is our view from the S1 camera. And like before, we're seeing that main lava lake that's glowing at night and silvery looking in the day, but it's liquid the entire time, right? This one again. Our west vent over here, our west vent pond over here. The lava seems to come up and through and goes through here, and it seems to dive back down here and here and here and goes under the crust. And once it goes into the crust, it's moving laterally, who knows exactly where, but possibly some pathway comes towards this glowing pit on this side. And focusing on that, let me zoom it in. You can see it was flashing almost every night here during the past week. And it seems like there's a little hornito, little vent up here and then the actual pit. But really in the last day or so, right there, it seems like it's not glowing as much. So you might have some changing pathways under this crust here that evolve over time. And it's just a little nuance to, little curiosity there to entertain us, because really it's not anything really significant changing on the surface here. Right, but cool to see that. And let's see, I think I was gonna pull up that tweet, but I don't think it made it in here. So let me try to get this to copy. And let me throw that in here. And let's go over to this tweet that Dane found from @AR_ETSCH, pulling out Copernicus footage here. So there is the wide view. And then looking zoomed into Kilauea, there it is. I thought I'd come in a little more because it's actually, you actually can see this glowing pit, satellite all the way up there. So there it is. There's our main active lava lake right in here. Here's our west vent pond. There's a west vent itself, and there's that eastern pit. And so cool to see that all the way from space here. It's imagery as well. So there, let's look at the F1. And there is that glowing pit in the back, so we'll see it actually active, but also there was a west vent pond. West vent itself is over here. You also see the southeast pit more easily, and all that movement of the lava lake. Can you zoom it in some more? A little less. Here we are at the end. You see it's still glowing a little bit, but it's not nearly as hot thermally at the end of the week as it was earlier at the beginning of the week, now that we loop it around. Circulation is still going that way, and that way, and that way, going back under the crust. So it's still moving through. It's interesting because that whole crust is not really rising at all, it doesn't seem like, but it's still lava still moving through it continually, persistently all the time. Here's the wider view from the KW camera, day and night, and day and night. Similarly, you can see no other action anywhere else in the perimeter. We haven't had any ooze-up flows around the crater perimeter in a while. It just hasn't been coming in enough to really lift that crater upwards to have to leak out the sides. It just seems to be holding steady right there at the present, which is a new pattern really in the last month, right, for Kilauea. So they're zooming into the lava lake itself, the V1 camera. So the lava level isn't changing a whole lot. It's still circulating, and you can see the southeast pit seems to flash and not really changing size. It seems to be holding steady at that slightly the word constricted there, right? It used to be a little bigger. It's slightly closed in, but it seems to have found a steady state size, and it doesn't seem to be shrinking anymore there. It seems to crust over and flash open and crust over and flash open. And that is our V1. Okay, so we'll move on. We have a few extra observations this week. So here we are from a photo and video release from a week ago on November 10th. Panoramic view of the summit up here. and across for you guys. You'll see quite a lot of gas coming up. The view is somewhat holding steady since the crust hasn't been rising as rapidly, really, since that intrusion we had back on September 20th. Another panoramic, and there is that central island. That new pit is back over here. There's our lava lake in the daytime. Crusted over, that silvery appearance. It all gets recycled as it circulates back through. Keep scrolling it down. Closer view at our west vent complex. There's a west vent itself. And there's that west vent pond. Lava comes up underneath here. And it used to spatter up and out and built this pile of rock over here through that process. But then it crusted over and it goes underground this way, lava lake, and seems to have a little opening. That is that west vent pond right over here. And then we have thermal maps, and this is the kind of product that's generated from those drone flights that will be what we get to next here. But that the flight that we're going to see was from October 5th. This is the more recent flight, October 28th, showing similar stuff. Right? You kind of look at where the hottest signals are coming from through the crust there, and then zoomed out at that view. So having seen this, we'll transition to the actual map and the tweet. And here is the tweet from Ben Welsh at PaleWire on Twitter. And here is what he says. Last month, the USGS team flew a drone over Hawaii's Kilauea volcano. It captured hundreds of photos of the collapsed Hawaiʻi mountain crater, which scientists patched into a digital map. Today, I got all the shots and data released via Freedom of Information Act. First move, convert the model into a 3D print. That's really cool. He got the model, converted the model into a 3D print. And if I scroll it down enough, there is his test print. Actually, he was able to print out. Pretty cool, that shape of the crater down there, right? And there's the actual map from October 5th that prompted this FOIA request. And there you can see a couple of outtakes of the images on here, right? So, Dane, I'll call you in here, and anything you want to add at this point about this process, yeah, now's the time before I actually show the video we made.
Yeah, I mean, the whole process, anybody can really do a Freedom of Information Act request. It's just it's a whole bureaucratic process to, submit it. Usually it's journalists or something like that ends up making these requests. But I never really even thought of FOIA requesting USGS, but because usually, all we got to do is just message them and put in a formal request and they'll fill it. Anyways, but hey, we got this 800 photos, I believe it was, in sequence and uploaded to GitHub for easy access for everybody. So can take them, download them, do whatever you want. Yeah, it's cool to have this. So Philip was able to make something kind of special with it, which was interesting. You kind of got to download all of these. And this is, the official paperwork from the FOIA request to the Department of Interior and then fulfilling the request. So yeah, they were able to get this archive of drone footage. It's just photos only in this archive, but we're able to make a little video sequence out of those, stitching them together.
Yeah, so you're seeing here the actual visual pan, right? The stitched together as just individual shots from the drone, and we're just going to put them in sequence here as it flew back and forth, scanning. This is what it was. This is how it makes those maps, as it shoots these grid of images. You see it gridding back and forth, and then they'll take that and do a structure from motion photogrammetry and generate that digital elevation model. But they're also shooting the thermal camera at the same time, and so now you see the thermal camera come on screen, and it's only filling that small area, but you can see as it's scanning back and forth, it's also capturing that heat signature, so they can do that same process, or they can then overlay on that digital elevation model this heat map, and you can see it's much more sensitive than the map we're actually getting from the USGS. You see the lava lake lighting up really brightly there as we come across it. The west vent pond, the central island is dark. See how that central crust is a little cooler than a perimeter. The perimeter has got a lot more bright spots than the middle. That's the bottom now. Scanning across, back and forth, back and forth. Several passes, different angle, different point of view, so you can get it all in 3D. So pretty cool stuff there.
One of the things that was interesting to me about it is you can see just the little movements of the drone operator, which shows that it is actually being flown by a person, right? I was kind of assuming that they would use some kind of grid flight plan and automated camera movements, and it just complete automation of the thing. But it seems like they're able to take that and still use it. Yeah, just one little thing that caught my eye was, wow, there's actually somebody's working the camera on this thing.
Yeah, it seems to be, yeah. And I mean, I suppose that makes sense that the actual flight is not always going to be in exactly the same place no matter what you do,
right?
Because the drone's going to be affected by the wind and the weather and all that. So you just always need to know and calculate it fresh every time. And I suppose if you're doing that, then you also have someone bumping the joysticks. Although I'm sure that Mike has got so much practice at this by now. There he is on the controls that he's probably flying more or less the same most of the time now, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was our little extra treat here for you guys today. We're gonna work on this a little more, and we'll release this as a standalone video at some point, with a little bit extra of those pans. But hopefully that was pretty cool there for you guys. Start it again. I'll fast forward here to that first thermal sequence. So yeah, maybe as I go through this time, really I try to point out, like, there is that central part that's got that harder, denser crust that's cooler, and you can see really how the outside is outside of this crack system right in here, where that heat's really coming up. Pretty cool there.
Do we know at all what the scale is on the thermal for the heat?
I don't think I saw.
I don't remember seeing that.
Yeah, but yeah, so it seems to be adjusting
automatically as well,
right? And it's obviously the hottest point in there is going to be that open lava lake. So right, and I think when they're making their maps, they're taking all this data and they're toning it down a bit, right? They're putting the gain down on it a little bit, so you don't see everything so red, but just the actual active surface right there. That's where that really bright orange stuff is really what's showing up in there.
Right.
Maps. Pretty cool. Really see that ring-like structure right there. Yeah, if it wasn't so much trouble, I'd like to have this every time. Like make this movie automatic part of the process too. I would say didn't take that long to assemble with their raw data there. So that is our visual observations on Kilauea this week. We'll look at what's happening deeper underground. This is just a surface pattern, which we were talking about is interesting and fascinating, but not really giving us much clue about what the volcano is going to do next. It's more just monitoring what's happening on the surface. Still very cool. I really like that southeast pit we just saw flash on screen right there. And once again, the USGS team. Mahalo you guys for sharing that. So let's go into the monitoring. Put the monitoring label on the screen here, and just to start off by reminding you guys of most recent maps that were put out both on October 28th and on October 5th had very similar volumes to what we saw in early or mid-September there, right after that in early October. So really we're not gaining much volume at the surface. That's kind of the first point. This is our SO2 emissions over the whole past year, and our most recent values are all right in here. So really, you can see how this is continuing this downward trend right there. Pretty clear downward trend. And the lava depth, here it is for the last week. You can see lots of little variations, hour to hour, day to day, and larger fluctuations here that seem to match the ground tilt at the summit of Kilauea. There's a ground tilt for the last week. We'll zoom out to the last month. We can't quite see the details of this line because of some noisy data right in the center here. but it's essentially following this pattern down and up, only within a small range. If I zoom it way in, I'll show you guys it's like at 372, let's call it, right in there. And it'll come all the way across to the right end of the graph, and we're at 372 maybe slightly lower even. We really haven't changed at all in over a month now. That's the big story. So this is the surface signal. Our tilt, we really can't really say, oh, it's going up or it's going down. It's not quite clear. Maybe if you really, it's more or less somewhere. Maybe it's going up slightly. Do something like that, but not very much and not very fast, right? Whereas SO2 is still going down. This is zoomed in for the last month. Here's our most recent low data points, right? Between 550 and 600. The most recent one was down closer to 500 tons per day. And lava depth is kind of stalled out right over here, lower than its previous peak before that intrusion actually hit. There's that long-term pattern there. GPS, this is where it starts getting interesting in Kilauea. So this is Uwikahuaʻi Crater Rim, north to south, which has been getting further apart as magma is coming into the volcano. It's been coming to the surface, but it's also been collecting underground and swelling underground even as it pops up, out and through, right? Similar to what we described with Mauna Loa. It's pushing sideways and it's pushing up at the same time. So we can see here the distance that's north to south was spreading. There were a couple of times, like right in here, this is where we saw our intrusion occur back in late September. It actually stopped coming up and seemed to stagnate a little bit, like it was not spreading as much, which means it was probably pushing more underground rather than sideways. It's pushing more horizontally, let's say, right? Transferring pressure in that direction until it actually did pop up and out during that intrusion back here. That's the most obvious large signal we saw in recent times. And we, at the time and since, have been considering whether that could be that new pattern. Really, since that occurred, you see the volcano is continuing spreading quite a bit, but it has had these little wiggles that it does, right? Where it's essentially doing that at a smaller scale. It's not going all the way to be stuck and clogged, blocked, as we described it back then, as much as we had in this time. They're much smaller blocks, if anything. Little constrictions, and then it clears out, and another one it clears out, and another one it clears out, and right here at the most recent increment, it seems like it's doing the same thing again, but likely it'll just resume it once again. So clearly goes to show that magma is still coming in. It's finding, it's trying to push its way through, but it's doing a lot of this adjustment and finding a new spot and pressurizing and pushing and pressurizing and pushing. It's doing that at a deeper level, just like Mauna Loa, deep enough that we're detecting it on a GPS, but not really detecting it on a tilt as much. Very similar pattern in that case for both volcanoes. So now it gets getting extra interesting if we come down to the Pu'u'o GPS, right? This is NPOC to Jacuzzi, north and south across the Middle East Rift Zone near Pu'u'o. And what you can see is that for the last year, these distances have been getting closer together, right? The actual value, like it was higher, now it's lower, right? So it's getting closer together. And that has been the case up until mid-October or so. And now we start seeing a little bit of different signal. It seems like instead of going down, it seemed like it flattened out. And now it seems like it's actually, those stations are getting further apart, right? Which by itself is something we want to keep a close eye on, because one possibility is magma coming in between those stations into the rift zone and pushing them apart and spreading them apart. And that is something that we know happened already. Post 2018, and it built up to the 2020 eruption and the resumption in 2021 after that first phase of that eruption ended. So we'll look at in a little more detail at this and dig into that a little bit, right? That's what we'll do next. So to start off, these are the 2-year GPS signals from Kilauea, and once again we're dealing with east at the top and north, south, and up, down, right? So at Wikahuna, we're still coming up and north and west, right? And we can look at the very, very right end of these dots as a current trend. We're probably looking at like that's probably about a month of data right in there, these long 2-year plots. So you can see that there was a time when Ukihuna, after that intrusion, was not rising, was going down, but now it's rising again. So it's still being filled and pushed from below. And if we look at all the stations on the summit, They're all rising. Byron's Ledge in the east is rising. Crater Rim is still rising, and the outlet is all still rising. They're all getting pushed in different directions, and the speed at which they're getting pushed changes a little bit. So we see this is going to the south a little bit more quickly, and look at that kind of nuance potentially. But let's move on to the East Rift. Okay, so on the East Rift, we can see Maunaloa is going east and south and down. Just focus on the down. Kaneohamo, 7 miles in the East Rift Zone, it's going down. Right? And if anything, if we look closer, if anything, the down is going down faster. And it's going south faster, and it's going east faster. And so it's getting pushed from something to the northwest of here. Right? Northwest of here is that Upper East Rift connector, that Upper East Rift area, not that Pu'u'u segment, but the one closer to the summit, which we'll point out here shortly. Let's keep going and look at Kamoamoa. And looking at the up and down, if anything, it might be going down really fast once again too. You go to North Pu'u'u Crater and POC, one of our stations for our line length, it's going down. So it's not like Mauna Loa where you see the sides going outwards and it's getting pushed upwards as well. Here we're seeing the sides go outwards, but going down the opposite direction. So that's not exactly the magma signal. There's a caveat here where the ground, as the magma is refilling the rift zone, the ground can kind of do all this little wiggling, and you can have these small scale adjustments. So we have to wait to see if this pattern of data continues, or if it's some smaller adjustment and it then changes and goes in the opposite way, right? But presuming this is actually the pattern and it seems to be consistent across all the stations, we're just seeing everything sagging going down. The station that's at the other end of that line, Jacuzzi, let's look at it. It's also going down, right? So I'm less concerned that if magma is going in that rift, it's not pressurizing it to the point where it's actually it's not showing any earthquakes, it's not showing any gas emissions, and it's not showing any of this current uplift right now, right? We did have a suggestion of uplift in one of the NSR images released by the USGS recently, so that's kind of still a possibility that's filling in that area, and it's just hard to pick up from these GPS stations individually like this, but that's reassuring to see everywhere we're pointing down. And if we look at Jonica, the furthest station to the east, it's also that same kind of pattern. It's actually, the scale is much more zoomed in, so you see it looks like a bigger scatter, but that's really not a whole lot of change there either. Right, so what the heck's going on there is really the question, right? So let's keep going. Let's look at this is marked south flank, but some of these south flank stations are near the East Rift, the Upper East Rift. So Ahua, that closest to the summit, is still going up. Uhimau, also going up. These are stops in the Chain of Craters Road before Maunaloa. And you get down to Devil's Throat, and not exactly. Maybe it's definitely not going down like it was before, right? So maybe it's coming up, but this might be the extent of that pressurized where magma is clearly coming in and pushing up. If it's pushing up, it's also pushing out. We looked at the map last week and how it's pushing its other areas, and really it's that Middle East Rift Zone getting pushed from the northwest by the Upper East Rift connector, and it looks like there's getting pushed at different rates at Jacuzzi and Pu'u'u, right? So it's almost like they're both getting pushed from one side, and they're kind of diverging a little bit as they're getting pushed away, diverging and then sagging downwards too at the same time. So that's one possibility, besides magma going in there. Like, looking in more detail, it doesn't look as convincing that it's actually the magma pushing it apart, because everything is sagging down. That's the bottom line there. So interesting signal. We talked about how there's some complexity in that area. It seems to be progressing, but what we're really seeing is a sign of the Upper East Rift pressurizing. And we'll see that when we show you guys the earthquake history as well. But just to put it in a little bit more perspective, here is the last 10 years of GPS. You can see that this big jump that you see in the middle here, that's 2018. So you can see Uikahuna was rising up and then was relieved by 2018, all that collapse. And then really since then, it's been rising. That's the first summit eruption, slight relief, second summit eruption, slight relief, and it's still been coming up. That's the long-term filling pattern. Same at Byron's Ledge. Same at the outlet. And same at the Crater Rim. These are all the summit stations. Now looking at that Upper East Rift, area, going down, going down. Look a little closer here, right? Following 2018, that Upper East Rift area was going up, right? So it was filling with magma. And then the most recent summit eruption in late 2021, since then it's been going down and contracting as well. Almost all these stations show that similar pattern, all the way to Pu'u'u and beyond there, right? Whereas when we look at those stations that are closer to the summit on the south flank that we're just looking at as far as Upper East Rift, there is that 2018 drop you see was spreading across, but following that mid-2021 it was going down, and now here it is coming back up again, right? That's the signal we're looking at, that up at the very end, up at the very end, up at the very end here at Devil's Throat 2, right? And in contrast, you see other areas further away still going down, staying steady, going down. Now I'm getting so far away, so it's probably not even worth comparing. So one last thing, the tilt on the ground monitoring here. Let's come back for the whole last month here. There is our Uwikahuna station, right, which may be slightly coming up. Sand Hill, pretty flat, really, despite those little variations. Can't really say much from the other ones so far, but Escape Road at that East Rift connector, you can see is actually pretty clearly swelling over there. Pu'u'u is moving down, right? Actually, still the shallow area is still contracting. So it really seems like it's more of a sagging pattern with some weird wiggling back and forth of those blocks of ground near Pu'u'u, like a wiggly tooth or something. It's not quite. It's just getting pushed from the side there, and it's not quite moving in a clear way because of the way it's anchored down there below, right? Something along those lines. So that's our tilt, and that, I believe, wraps up the monitoring. We can move on to earthquakes. Earthquakes on the screen here, and I'll wrap it up with our earthquakes and put this in perspective from the earthquakes point of view. So recent earthquakes on Kilauea, the levels pretty steady over the last year. There's really nothing alarming about the numbers or anything really different about the numbers there. For the last month, pretty similar. Really can't get much out of that either. And the values that we're getting are about 40 earthquakes per day in the summit region, and the Pahala kind of all combined, this whole map area right in here. But you can see over the last week, there is the earthquake pattern. Zoom it in. Still quite a bit under the summit, and you do get the south flank events over here, right? And looking a little more closely, you maybe get a few southwest rift events and getting some in this Hawaii fault region right in here, in this little triangle zone, but you're not getting anything along the rift itself, right? So if magma was coming and pressurizing this area of the East Rift, you'd expect there to be lots of earthquakes in here, and we're not seeing those at all. So when we're seeing those signals at Pu'u'u over here, we're seeing it's getting pushed from the northeast. That's from that summit pushing it, right? And the area over here, like probably through here, is the limit of that magma filling, something like that. Or possibly a little further through here, something like that, right? That's the extent of it. We'll come back to that, as I mentioned. Here's that cross section. So this is depth and longitude here. And so there is that kind of bulging zone deeper down there. That's that deeper part of the volcano that's being filled with magma and causing that pressure, cause these earthquakes to occur. So over the last month, there it is. You see that southwest rift zone a little bit more clearly over the last month, and still nothing on the southeast rift anywhere, right? We talked about how this area probably is open and so it doesn't have to quake because of that. But if it was pressurized, it actually would start showing earthquakes, and see evidence of how that happened a few years ago. But that's not going on. This rift looks all pretty clear here. Just incidentally, the deep earthquakes we mentioned before, that deep south of Kilauea, there it is, that purple one. Deep down on the ground, deep down underneath that summit area. Actually, not underneath the summit, but south of it, right? So that if we're looking at this cross section here, then these deep spots will be closer to us in the screen, and then moving away into the screen to reach this area towards the summit as it moves from that point of view back into the map there. So that's the feeder system for Kilauea. Those are Kilauea's earthquakes. Let's just do a little bit of earthquake recap here, and I loaded up a couple of sets here from the Iris earthquake browser. Looks like they're having to reload, but that's all right here. So we are looking at the start of 2019 until present, right? So this is the whole history since 2018, essentially. And this is what I like to do. I like to animate them. So let me start playing here, right? So back 2019, earthquakes underneath the summit, south flank areas as well. And you start getting them coming in the southeast rift all the way to there, and a southwest rift. Let's see if I can get this label to go away. And so those 2 years, let me pull it back. Let me zoom it into now, so you can see there's nothing happening here on that rift area as much. So let me get us a little bit more centered here. All right. So there was earthquakes refilling in that collapse pit underground before magma actually burst out. It's building pressure, and then it builds up and bursts out right there at the summit. Before it does that, it actually activates this whole upper southeast rift area. And then got ahead of me here. There. So then the eruption begins, it releases pressure, the eruption ends, it pressurizes again, has an intrusion that reaches a southwest rift over here, and it erupts again to the summit, and then it kind of backs off. And then it's more recently over here, starts quaking a little bit more again. This is that histogram showing, relatively speaking, how many earthquakes. And so that's kind of the background building up. That's the first summit eruption, second summit eruption, and background levels, and just starting to quake again here at the right end. So to make that more obvious, let's pause this, advance to this time bracket, which is from the beginning of 2020 now. And let's animate this. Once again, first eruption, second eruption. You really see how in the past this upper southeast rift connector really can activate a lot more than we're seeing now when it actually pressurizes. So that's how we know that area is open, right? All the way to there, and likely southwest rift a little bit to there as well. It was open enough that it can fill with magma and pressurize prior to it popping up and erupting at the summit up here. And that's the bottom line. So let's look at just the last couple months here. Go back to September 17th, just before that summit intrusion, just about 2 months ago now. And let's animate those and put it in here so you guys can see. There's the intrusion, pops up right in there. And since then, low background levels, but just kind of happening continually, just filling in the area, showing the magma is down there, pressurizing, filling in, causing a little bit more quaking than before. Not huge amounts, nothing concerning, just slightly elevated back there. But just showing us that there is something happening in that deeper part of the volcano there. So, clear thing missing in the last couple months here, right? Nothing happening anywhere through here. That's different from what we had back in 2020 and 2021. So, just to dig into this little upper east rift change a little bit and try to figure out what's going on exactly. It seems like it's still pressurizing more at the summit, and that means that really there's no huge significant change, and the threat to people hasn't changed as well. All right, so that is the earthquakes, and just to make sure that we're giving credit once again to the USGS HVO, here is a Kilauea update, and we're just trying to elaborate on all these key findings that are in the reports here. No significant changes, all activity in the crater, overflight measurements and volumes and all that here, and emission rate of approximately 500 tons per day measured on November 15th. Otherwise, they're still saying no unusual activity in the rift zones, measurement from continuous gas, downwind of pool, still below detection limits, so no SO2 emissions coming in there. So that will be an indication of magma in the area as well. So no change there. Right, that's the earthquakes on Hawaii, but there is one other thing to mention with earthquakes that made the news this past week. I got a few messages, and this is just a little another curiosity here. Let's let this USGS map load. Here's a USGS volcanoes map. See from all the western US there, all the ones in Alaska. Here we are in Hawaii. But I'm going to pull this over so we can see the Western Pacific, Japan, Philippines, and right in here, these are the Northern Marianas. Right in there, the Northern Mariana Islands. And the reason I bring this up is because also in this past week, we've had information statement from the USGS, Northern Mariana Islands Volcano Observatory information statement. This made the news various places, made some news outside of our island, so just bring it up here for those of you guys that care enough to stick with us here into our second hour. Not sure how we say this exactly. Ahi Seamount Volcano is still an alert level and color code unassigned because there's not a whole lot of monitoring instruments there, but there has been some activity. Starting mid-October, hydroacoustic sensors at Wake Island began recording signals consistent with activity from an undersea volcanic source. In collaboration with the Laboratoire de Geophysique in Tahiti, recent combined analysis of hydroacoustic signals together with the data from seismic stations located at Guam and Chichijima Island, Japan, suggests the source of this activity is at or near Ahi Seamount. Furthermore, but we'll walk this back here, but just to read it what it said earlier, satellite imagery from November 6 shows discoloration on the surface of the ocean at Ahi's location. Taken together, these data strongly suggest Ahi is a source of the activity, in spite of there being several other seamounts in the area. Hydroacoustic signals are ongoing at this time, although the number of events being detected has declined over the past 3 days. And this was issued on Tuesday. There are no monitoring stations near Ahi Seamount, which limits our ability to detect and characterize volcanic unrest there. Continue to monitor available remote hydrophonic, seismic, and satellite data closely. So that is the most recent activity. The background is stated here. Ahi Seamount is a large conical submarine volcano that rises to within 79 meters of the sea surface at about 18 kilometers southeast of the island of Farallon de Pájaros, Racas, in the Northern Mariana Islands. Water discoloration has been observed over the submarine volcano during previous periods of activity, and in 1979, the crew of a fishing boat felt shocks over the summit area, followed by upwelling of sulfur-bearing water. From April 24 to 25, 2001, an explosive submarine eruption was detected seismically from a seismic station on Rangiroa Atoll, Tuamotu Archipelago. The event was well constrained at a location near the southern base of Ahi, with a summit within the location uncertainty. Another eruption was detected from April 24th to May 17th, 2014, using data from seismometers on sub-area volcanoes in the Northern Mariana Islands and hydrophone arrays at Wake Island. NOAA divers also reported hearing explosions while conducting coral reef research nearby on Farallon de Pájaros. The 2014 eruption of Ahi formed a new crater near the summit of the volcano, and a large landslide chute developed on its southeast flank. So, I'll jump to this, show you guys. This is a sonar scan of Ahi Seamount there. That conical volcano coming up. This way is north. This is its south side. There's this big landslide scar right there, it looks like, and have some other previous scarp over here on this side as well, but I don't quite see the summit crater. Maybe it's something in here, and really hard to see if it's this one static angle, but that's Ahi Seamount. And we'll just step it back to, there was another update issued today. It's showing, so I guess the previous one was on Monday. Showing today because it's actually showing whatever CHS standard time actually happens to be. It's across a date line from us, right? So it's actually Monday. In any case, today's update says that hydroacoustic and seismic signals just of underwater eruptive activity at Ahi Seamount have declined over the past week. The reported discoloration of ocean surface near Ahi Seamount early in the week has been reinterpreted as low weather cloud, not related to volcanic activity. No other signs of volcanic unrest were detected at Ahi Seamount or any other Northern Mariana Islands during the volcanoes during the past week. So, no discoloration of the ocean surface, but you still have the hydroacoustic and seismic signals that occurred. So the interpretation is still there, just nothing maybe coming to the surface. It might have all stayed underground. If you're getting something at the surface, that means it actually essentially erupted underwater. So it could be just unrestful, but not actually erupted, right? It's hard to tell exactly if that's the case. If you were to detect through satellite SO2 or something like that, you could then, once again say, oh, something came out of the ground. But that seems to be in question at this point now. And otherwise, that's it. We just have background here and they explain how there is not a lot of close by monitoring. there, so that makes it challenging. And so, in case you're wondering still, where exactly is this thing? Let me pull up this other map. Ahi Seamount. Let's zoom it out. There's a Farallon de Pajaros. Fly Reef, the Mog Islands. Zoom it out. Right, here's the end of the Northern Marianas. So there's Farallon and there's Ahi right there. It's like the fourth from the top. Keep zooming it out. It's right there. And here we are in Hawaii. So it's almost straight west of us, a long way, all the way to the Mariana Trench, over the deepest part of the ocean floor. So that's the little curiosity of off island this week, and there's only one final thing to mention this week, and that is our USGS Weekly Volcano Watch. And this week's USGS Volcano Watch is learning from the impacts of Kilauea's 2018 Lower East Rift Zone lava flows. And this is a nice summary write-up of research published this summer by the group from Singapore Earth Observatory, led by Eleanor Meredith, PhD candidate, Earth Observatory of Singapore. And what they're doing is essentially establishing a damage scale for which they can go out and assess impact of eruptions, not only in Hawaii, but elsewhere. And 2018 is one major test case, we'll say, right? Or where they actually were able to develop this method and technique and then go and use it in other places as well. So we'll just cover the Volcano Watch today and the big picture takeaways. This is actually some fantastic research that we want to go into in more detail at some point, but we won't draw it out any further today. We'll just highlight what we have here. And that's to say that they've actually used field visits, visited properties, met the residents, and assessed more than 8,000 photographs taken by the USGS before, during, and after the eruption. So similar to what we were doing ourselves, Dane, but we were also adding in all the aircraft pilots and all the other on-the-ground data that we could get. So interesting to see it done once again. So they developed the damage states, they classified all the structures, and based on the structures, they say, so all structures includes homes, water tanks, farming, or industrial buildings. So like a greenhouse would count, like, right, a tractor shed would count, catchment tank counts. So this is not permitted houses. This is a much bigger classification and bucket than that. And you count it that way, and you get to 1,839 destroyed structures plus 90 damaged. So really, that is closer to the number of structures. Of course, not all permitted. Our permitted structure count was, I want to say, 716 or 720, somewhere in there.
Less. Permitted was in the 600s.
So this is a much bigger number.
Yeah.
39. So this is the highest recorded numbers of impacted structures from a lava flow event in Hawaii and one of the highest globally. However, later in 2021, in La Palma, Spain, there were 2,896 buildings destroyed. And later at Nyiragongo in Congo, there were 3,629 homes, 12 schools, and 3 health facilities destroyed in Congo there. So clearly it was a huge impact in Hawaii, and you can see that their methodology they developed here was immediately useful at other places where, once again, because people are much more numerous on Earth and living in places that have volcanic impact, we're getting events not only in Hawaii, but elsewhere in the world, like La Palma, Spain. And so
yeah.
They do note that it's related to lava flow thickness. You know, if things are, if the flow is thicker than 2 meters, it's pretty much just going to destroy almost everything. And if it's smaller than that, it'll have some intermediate impact, I'll call it, right? So like it might not actually like push the thing all the way over, but it's still melting it or burning it up or pushing it and deforming it and things like that. So that's the long and short of it here. One key thing that we've been talking about for a long time, Dane, is how it's not just the lava that'll get you, but there can be fire that gets you also. So they talk about how some of these overflows from the main channel started fires, and one of the key findings, damage was recorded up to almost 2,000 feet, 600 meters away from the lava flow, likely from secondary processes such as fire spread facilitated by the dry vegetation downwind of the lava channels. So that's a key hazard we've been talking about for a while. It's not just the lava that'll get you, but all that fire that is set from there as well. And I will stop there and let you say what would you like to say.
Yes, I mean, so the thing that immediately jumps out to me is like 2,000 feet. That's from the lava flow itself, but you can still take damage even further away, miles away. We found out from the 132 and the what is it? Alii? Ala'ili, yeah. Road houses that weren't even damaged in the eruption and were damaged afterwards by steam vents, right? That the steam eventually came up and started damaging them later, years later even. Yeah. So that was an interesting, little side note to that is from the lava flow, but from an eruption that it goes out even much further. Like, and then we start talking about, damage from the magnitude 6.9, right? It's very good at what it does, right? And one of the interesting things to me is, and this was always an issue in 2018, is trying to figure out what is a home or not, right? Because you start at the high end where you have a permitted home, it's on record as a home, it's taxed as a home, all that. Then you go down to unpermitted homes that were taxed as a home, they're on record in the real property tax office as a home, but they're unpermitted. And then you get unpermitted that weren't taxed and were unknown. And then you get down into things like it's a shed, basically, or it's a container, a 40-foot container that's somebody's living in. So it keeps going down. So one of the interesting things to me where I'm going with that is in Hawaii, we never really got a great homes loss count. I mean, the number is 720. It still has kind of an asterisk on it to me. I mean, because there's that defining that line of what is and what is not is so harsh. But the one interesting thing is that Spain didn't do it either, right, in their counts of the homes lost. But DR Congo did, right? They actually gave the breakdown, and it's hard, right? One of the things that impressed me at the time immensely was we were doing all this work to try and document these homes. Our maps were getting used by Department of Defense, going into the FEMA requests, and we thought, oh wow, this we're doing good things here. And then the Paradise Fire happened in Northern California, and NorCal Fire started doing documentation about the homes lost there, right? And these guys were doing thousands of homes, breaking them down by businesses, homes, garages, and doing thousands in 24 hours, 48 hours time. It was absolutely mind-boggling to see. So it can be done, right? And maybe not the places that you would expect to have it done, do it. But, that's something to always strive for, is that kind of, not just structures lost, but we can give that breakdown of what they were. And in the actual report, they do some breakdown of like, this is how many catchment tanks we count as structures, right? This is how many greenhouses that count as structures. So it's, we encourage you to go check out the bulletin in volcanology, the actual report, that this is just really a teaser for this volcano watch.
Yeah, and we will cover it more. It's just that it would add another hour to our podcast today, so we're not going to do it today, but absolutely, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there. Yeah, they do note here, some homes surviving kipukas were classified as not damaged at all or damaged less severely. However, these homes were greatly impacted by lack of access and disruption of utilities. We also noted impacts to homes from fissure steam and gases months after the eruption had ended. They're referring specifically to Ala'ili there, right? So, yeah, exactly what you said. Like, they're actually broadening to try to catch all different kinds of structure, regardless of whether it's permitted or not. They're also broadening to catch all kinds of impact to homes, regardless of whether they're destroyed or not. So that's really good to see.
It's a start. Yeah, it's good. It's a step in the right direction.
And the thing that this allows, we'll call them government responders to do, is actually have a systematic approach, which is something that governments need to be able to operate, right? So the scientists can be like, let's devise a plan, and let's come up with a plan and they can actually devise a plan that's logical and all that. But the government really needs to have it be like, here's what you need to assess, here's your scale, here's when you do it, and here's what we need to know. And they actually now have a system that's been used in a couple other countries, and
Right.
hopefully in the future could be used here as well.
Yeah, just to expand upon that a little bit, one of the issues that we identified with FEMA in 2018 was the inability to adapt to situations that they haven't been trained for, basically. So FEMA responds to something like a hurricane. It's been well practiced. They have well established policies. It happens every year. It's pretty standardized. Well, when they came out to do the eruption, they understood things like the lava has consumed the house. But things like the crack is under the house and the floor, the concrete slab is now 150 degrees. Or there's cracks now that are 5 feet long right out inside the front door. Didn't register, right? In and out 1 year because they had no training for it. They had no practice at it. So hopefully with something like this, those types of homes are now included because we have a damage scale that would now actually, be able to accommodate those types of damages. Whereas before, it was just giant gray area. It was in 2018. It was just gray areas for them.
Great points.
All right.
That's all I got.
Into Q&A? Yeah, Q&A time. I don't think we have that much here, but we do have a couple. We had one good one here from Brian I want to get to first. He asks, why do some eruptions have the 100-meter tall fountaining while other ones have been relatively calm?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's really a couple of things. I mean, one, it's like the gas content of the lava that's in there, right? And the other is like how it's kind of the nozzle that it has to come out of. So the pattern you would get in Pu'o'o, for example, when Pu'o'o first began, is you might have like almost like a geyser pattern where you'd get a high fountain and it would shut all the way off and repressurize, and a high fountain and shut off and repressurize, and a high fountain again. So like episodic fountaining, right, is as we call it. When it does that, it has a chance to pressurize in between, and then when the gas is building up, that critical mass eventually comes foaming out like a crack in a cork of a champagne, right? So what's happening with the magma also is the gases are dissolved in the magma when they're deeper than a half mile down, and once it crosses that threshold and comes within that shallower half mile, the gas bubbles start to come out of solution, and they start to rise with the magma and start accumulating, and as they accumulate and rise, they get bigger and pressurize more, and so it's like a runaway process. It's like opening a bottle of champagne or a soda or a pop, right? You don't just barely do it. Like once you crack it, all the gas is coming out and causes a whole causes the eruptive process, right? So a lot of that's about the gas actually getting out. So the gas content in the magma matters. How much is pressurized matters, and the size of the hole it's coming out of also matters, because it's coming out of a much bigger area. As we saw like in 2018, right? It was actually putting out a huge volume of lava, but it wasn't having to shoot it up that high because it was just a huge base, and it was just coming up like short and fat rather than skinny and tall. That makes sense. So the volume might have been even larger, but it wasn't out of a tiny little nozzle, and it wasn't spraying all the way up, and it wasn't pressurized every month or so. It was kind of continuously. Towards the end, we started seeing 2018. We started seeing the surges and the pulses and all that, kind of showing that variation that can affect from the pressure coming down the system summit. So those are my thoughts on that. If you want to add anything, Dane.
No, I mean, that sounds about it. I mean, one of the things we saw in 2018 was what we refer to as the Doomsday Report. It was kind of all the list of different worst case scenarios that could occur, and one of them in there was 2,000-foot fountains, right? But that all came down. I mean, it definitely had the pressure, right? But that nozzle was so big and only got bigger as time progressed that didn't get those big fountains. But I mean, it was still pretty big. I mean, it was probably at least 100 meters tall type of thing at one point, in its height.
Yeah. And in hindsight, that eruption was almost gravitationally draining, right? It's just draining by gravity. And we described like the analogy of it almost being like a bucket with a hole in the bottom of it, and so it was kind of just gushing out the side, right? So it's kind of just flushing more so than it was pressurizing and squirting, right? And Kilauea at the summit of Kilauea in 1959, that was a famous eruption for many high fountains that occurred like that. That's right at the summit, so there's no draining at all happening. There's all pressurizing and spraying and pressurizing and spraying. So whereas we had like an open pathway right? And it was kind of just doing this kind of thing, kind of, coming out from one side and then pulling out the other. That as well.
Right. Yvonne asked, any idea why the gas levels are so low right now? Usually emissions are higher.
I think you just got to come down to there's not as much lava coming out. I mean, there's not enough lava to come out to lift the crust up any further, right? I mean, you have to wonder if any lava is coming out, and if so, how much? Is it just circulating out of its own stored heat in there? Or is it coming up and coming up and replacing stuff, and something is going back down? It's like a down draining going on, and that stuff can feed rift or elsewhere. Regardless, even if it's coming in and cycling that way, the amount coming out of the volcano, it doesn't seem to be as much. So clearly that seems to be a pattern, and it's winding down. And I think ultimately the answer has to be something to do with less magma is reaching close to the surface. It's in placing the deeper part of the volcano more so.
Right.
That's where our headline this week of Kilauea's pressure shifts deeper comes from that exactly.
Right. Just to show you how little is going on the surface. I mean, this morning I was going through all the different photos for the time lapses to create those. And usually you have to check for things like the camera freezing, right? One camera will freeze, and it's not that uncommon. And you can just edit that out. There were multiple times where I was looking at the thermal, like, did the camera freeze? And would have to get really in there and start looking at the lines on the lava lake. No, it's still going. Looking at timestamps and stuff like that, like constantly, because it's like, man, it just looks like it's not moving. Like everything's the same type of thing the whole week.
This is the least it's moved this entire eruption, really, right? Like for it to not be coming up for this long is a change for sure. Yeah,
and without stopping too. I mean, it's been continuous, even though it's barely churning. It's continuous. So yeah,
so interesting progression there. Yeah, and kind of to tie this back to that last question too, right? You usually see eruptions kind of start off with much higher volumes and rates, and then they kind of tail off as they kind of release that pressure and that gas and all of that stuff. And so when you have high fountain, when you have fissures, usually like a fissure kind of is a long crack coming out the whole eruption site. Usually will drain back and focus in one place and cause a high fountain. But that high fountain usually kind of winds down lower and lower and lower as eruption goes on, and finally it shuts all the way off, and you just have the low level spattering and lava coming out and a flow like that, right? And likewise, the eruption of Kilauea in the grand scheme of things as well, like more lava at the beginning, and it's been tailing off kind of steadily through the whole eruption. But we may be getting to some critical threshold now, right? Where it's just not able to come to the surface as easily. I put it that way because of that intrusion that we had September 20th. That really seemed to be the main harbinger of change, right? That clearly indicating that magma was finding it easier to push into and intrude an area underground under the summit rather than come up and out of the top. So there's some kind of what you could think of as a block or enough pressure above the weight of it or any of that stuff that we've talked about in the past. Ultimately, it was easier for it to inject underground than it was to come up, and it still seems to be easier for it to move and inject underground than to come up. And so less gas, less lava piling up, and continuing earthquakes at low level, and all at GPS indicators that we covered there. But it's kind of more of the same ultimately in the end. Interesting, but more of the same.
All right. I think that gets us through questions answered. Do want to do one final shout out. We had some super chats. Gary Bryan, $35 came in, longtime supporter there. Says, thank you so much, Philip and Dane, your preparation, review, and analysis. Appreciate the support there, Gary. And we also had Chris Kiki come through with a $50 donation. Thank you, Philip and Dane, for your hard work and dedication. Appreciate the support there. Do want to also thank one more last time our supporter and sponsor, Eye Care Hawaii. If you need glasses on Big Island, they got that 24-hour or that same day turnaround on glasses. So definitely check them out. We appreciate their support. And I believe for me, that is it. We will be back next Thursday at 5 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. That is our normal time for streaming, unless something happens, something significant, and then we will go live with that and do something special, a presentation or whatever is going on. Don't exactly expect it, but hey, you never know when you're living on multiple active volcanoes. All right, Phil, with that, I will pass it back to you.
yeah, that's mostly it. We might put something short out, probably just on Facebook if we're at the fair this weekend. A little summary, we might do a little bit of that, and we also are hoping to bring you guys on Tuesday the After Dark in the park, the broad talk, and so we'll see how that works out. And worst case, we'll post it after the fact, but we'll still try to bring that to you guys. A little extra national park info and more of the ecology, and which is as much a part of our residence life here as the geology underground is. A little slightly off topic, but we'd like to make sure we bring that to you guys just to continue that coverage of that program. So,
Right.
Until Saturday if we see you then, or until Tuesday if we see you then, or until Thursday. See you then. From HawaiiTracker.com, this is Dan DuPont. I'm Philip Ong. Aloha, everyone.